So I'm Ruth Mann, and here at STRI, between myself and Dr. Newell that you see on the Avera stand, we look after all of the trials. Various different things within the trials that you'll see today, and what we're looking at here is the development of products. The trial that's on the ground that we're going to talk about is really coming towards the end of the product development for this one. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the background and the history of how we've got to this stage. Really what happened in the beginning is Bayer have come and said, we have a new fungicide, we think it's got really good potential for disease control in the turf market, and we also think it brings something a little bit extra. But the first thing we'll have to do by law is look at the disease control. So we have to prove within a certain set of trials that it can do what it says on the tin, and that it can do it in a very similar extent as other products that are in the market, so that we achieve really good control before it comes out. They take quite a few years to do, so this is about the 4th year that we've been working with this product. So the first few years we were looking at various different diseases. In the golf market we've been looking at red thread and dollar spot, and making sure that it can actually control those diseases. In the football market we've been looking at leaf spot on ryegrasses. And then the biggest one we'll be looking at is Fusarium, obviously, which is the #1 turf disease in the UK. So that I can show you a bit of that, we've got a graph up here that shows the results of a Fusarium trial that we ran last year. One of the things we do in all of these trials when we set them up is we always keep in a standard fungicide, so something that's already on the market that you guys are used to using and that we know will control disease. And by using that we can then say, well, yes, that had the effect that we're expecting it to have, and then we can see whether this one performs as well as, better than, or isn't as good, which means that when it comes to the Chemical Regulations Directorate looking at it, they can say, yeah, the product does exactly what other products in the market are doing, it's better than, or no, it's not performing, we're not going to give it the authorization. In the case of this trial, we started really from what we would call curative control. So there was disease there that really needed treated. So we put down the treatments and then we'll see what happens to the disease over time. When you're looking at Fusarium, October last year wasn't too bad. It was quite decent month, we still had growth. It was a bit like it is at the minute. It was sort of cooler in the evenings and in the mornings, but we're still getting some good sun. So we got curative control, so we get the disease, the grass begins to grow again, and we get a drop down in the amount of disease that we see. The test product that's in here now was much better than the standard product we were looking at, and an awful lot better than the untreated, where the disease just increased up to around 25% disease. Your golfers aren't going to be very happy if they're trying to play on 25% Fusarium on golf greens. So it showed then that we do have got the disease control that's needed is there. All that information then is passed back to Bayer, and they put together what's called a dossier that goes off to the regulatory authorities, and they decide whether the product gets authorization or not on those disease control figures. From that then we've taken it through to this trial, which is looking at what would happen over the course of a full season. So we're looking at how you would go about disease control on a golf green from April right through to Christmas, and in this case it's going to go beyond. As with all of the trials that I do, I won't treat the grass particularly well. I will create the conditions that are needed to get the disease. So we wanted to start beginning of the year looking at red thread. To get red thread you don't want any nitrogen, so this turf wasn't fed at all from the beginning of the season. We started to get red thread coming in May, and we started to see the disease in the plots. So we applied all of the fungicides. This plot here at the very beginning is untreated. It has never had any fungicide all year. We then have a few plots with different fungicides in. In this trial we used numerous different standard products just so that we could see where the test product was coming in relation to everything else that was on the market. All of the fungicides controlled red thread, wasn't a problem at all, exactly what we'd expect. Red thread's pretty easy disease to control, especially if you're going to use a fungicide. We then started to get into June and the grass really began to suffer. The meadowgrass was perfectly happy. Meadowgrass doesn't seem to really care what we throw at it. But the bentgrass really began to stress out and we started to lose cover. And you can still see in this untreated plot where the bentgrasses have faded out and they're only really starting to come back again now in the autumn. So we have quite a few sort of weaker areas, and in this untreated plot especially bare areas where the bentgrass is stressed out. Where we look at a standard fungicide plot, the weak areas are still there. They haven't completely stressed out. There isn't the same amount of bare areas as there is in the untreated, but it was still pretty weak. What we were finding with the test product was we weren't seeing that same weakness. The bentgrass was much happier. You can see where it is in the turf. It's much tighter sward. There isn't the openness and there isn't the turf loss. So we were getting something over and above the disease control. Disease control was perfect, but there seemed to be something a bit more. Now that the sun's gone in, which is the perfect time for it, you will all be able to see how much darker green these two plots are compared to the two in front. And that's part of the effect of the product. I'm a skeptical scientist, and when I first saw this I thought, oh, well, there's a bit of dye in it, and I'm just seeing the effects of dye. It hasn't stopped raining here all summer, and these effects were still visible 6 and 7 weeks after treatment. Well, that's not dye. Dye would have just washed straight through. So it's one of those that the product is actually encouraging this green coloration within the turf. So we're getting what looks like a much healthier turf. When the sun does shine up here, and it makes it quite difficult to be able to see the different colours in green, I have what's called a chlorophyll index meter, and this actually measures the radiation, the colour in the radiation that's coming down, and the reflectance from the green coloration back again. So when we use it, I can, without needing my eyes, which I think is quite visible, I can also put this in the numbers and demonstrate exactly the difference within the different plots. So this plot is scoring 180. Can you see the red dots? So that's where it's being reflected back to the kit. So we haven't done anything at all. We're getting a chlorophyll index of 180. Where we've applied a fungicide, we're getting a chlorophyll index of 177. So it's exactly the same. There isn't any difference between the two plots in terms of colour. And on the test product, we're getting a chlorophyll index of 240. So we're getting an increase in the green coloration. The other thing this meter does, which is quite neat, is also takes into account the cover, the sward cover, the actual grass composition. So we are seeing the effect of these being slightly weaker and more open compared to a much denser and tighter sward. The other thing that we've done with this is look at the effects on playability. And again, this is quite obvious to see at the minute because you can see where the sward's quite open and the effect of ball roll over that sward will bubble. So you'll not have as much smoothness as you have in a tighter, neater sward here. We've done that using our trueness meter, and if anybody hasn't seen the trueness meter, they're going to demonstrate it on your next station. So we've now got to the stage where we've done all the spring stuff, we're getting into autumn. It's already starting to feel quite autumnal the last couple of days. 2 weeks ago we saw the first signs of Fusarium on the trials ground, so we put down our first preventative treatment for the autumn on this last week. And we're seeing the effects of that here, which is why we're seeing the much darker green coloration. We're just beginning to see Fusarium come in on the untreated plots here. We've got a bit of a spot here and another bit coming through here. So over the course of the winter, as the disease starts to come in, hopefully what we'll see is this will become absolutely plastered in Fusarium if I get my way. The fungicide plots won't have the disease. Any luck, neither will the test product, but this should still continue to look better because we've got this increased turf quality in these plots. The other thing I want to look at within this and see over time is what's it going to be like in the recovery come next spring. So when this has had a pretty poor winter, if we get any snow and I manage to get some snow mould in, how will we get through recovery in the spring? I'm expecting this to be pretty poor, but then looking at this one with the extra benefits over the top of a standard fungicide, will we be able to see better recovery and much quicker playable surfaces for golf come early next spring, especially if you get an early Easter and golfers are out for it.